I have examined over 14,000 pieces of physical evidence in my career. Fibers, threads, fabric swatches, loose hairs pulled from crime scenes and sealed in plastic bags and shipped to laboratories where people like me spent decades staring through microscopes trying to make dead material tell the truth. I cataloged evidence from kidnappings, homicides, assaults, missing persons cases, cold cases reopened after 30 years when someone found a box in a storage facility and remembered that a little girl had never come home. 14,000 pieces of evidence across a 42-year career with the Oregon State Police Crime Laboratory, and later as a contract specialist with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have testified in court over 300 times. I have helped convict murderers and exonerate the wrongfully accused, and provided closure to families who spent years not knowing. My name is Robert Allen. I am 81 years old. And I am telling you this so you understand that when I say something is unexplainable, I do not use that word casually. In the summer of 1970, a 6-year-old girl named Molly Graves disappeared from a church picnic in the Siskiyou Mountains of southern Oregon. 14 days later, she was found alive in a shallow rock overhang approximately 11 miles from where she had last been seen. She was dehydrated, disoriented, and wrapped in a covering made of woven hair that did not belong to any animal species known to science. The covering was sent to my laboratory. I was 25 years old at the time, 3 years into my career, and what I found when I put those fibers under magnification was the beginning of something that would consume the next 56 years of my life. I need to take you back to the beginning. Not just the beginning of the case, but the beginning of who I was when it found me. Because context matters when you are trying to understand why a man would dedicate his entire professional existence to a single thread of evidence that the rest of the world told him did not matter. I grew up in Medford, Oregon, which sits in the Rogue Valley between the Cascades to the east and the Siskiyous to the south. Beautiful country, the kind that makes you believe the world was designed by someone who cared about proportion and color. My father, Bill Allen, worked for the Bureau of Land Management as a surveyor, and my mother, Carol, taught 4th grade at Roosevelt Elementary. Ordinary people living ordinary lives in a valley surrounded by mountains that held secrets none of us understood. My father spent his career measuring those mountains, walking transects through old-growth timber and marking boundaries on maps. And he used to tell me that the forest was honest. It showed you exactly what it was if you paid attention. That was the first lie I ever believed, though my father did not know it was a lie when he told it. The forest is not honest. The forest is the most sophisticated deceiver on earth. It shows you what it wants you to see and hides everything else behind a curtain of green so thick and so deep that you could walk through it for a lifetime and never glimpse what lies on the other side. I studied chemistry at Southern Oregon College, which is what it was called back then before they upgraded it to a university, and graduated in 1967. I wanted to be useful in a concrete way, and forensic science appealed to me because it promised a world where physical evidence could not lie. A fiber was a fiber, a hair was a hair. You put it under a microscope and it told you what it was. I believed that with the certainty of a young man who had not yet learned that some evidence refuses to cooperate with your expectations. The Oregon State Police Crime Laboratory in the late 1960s was not the gleaming facility you might picture from television programs. It was a series of rooms on the second floor of a government building in Salem, staffed by 11 people who collectively handled every piece of physical evidence generated by law enforcement agencies across the entire state. We were perpetually understaffed, perpetually behind, and perpetually underfunded. My supervisor was a man named Paul Wright, a forensic chemist who had been with the lab since 1954 and who had the demeanor of someone who had seen too many crime scene photographs to be surprised by anything. Paul taught me the fundamentals of fiber analysis, which in those days meant a polarizing microscope, a set of mounting media, and an encyclopedic knowledge of textile manufacturing that you built one case at a time. Fiber analysis is not glamorous work. Most people do not realize that when a crime is committed, the most common physical evidence left behind is not blood or fingerprints or DNA. It is fibers. Microscopic threads transferred from clothing, from upholstery, from carpeting, from blankets, from anything made of woven or knitted material. A person sits on a couch and leaves behind fibers from their shirt. A body is transported in a vehicle and picks up fibers from the trunk lining. A child is wrapped in a blanket, and that blanket sheds material onto everything it touches. My job was to collect those fibers, identify them, and connect them to their source. Cotton, polyester, nylon, wool, silk, rayon, acrylic, each one with distinctive characteristics visible under magnification. Cross-sectional shape, surface texture, color, diameter, birefringence. I could look at a single fiber and tell you what it was made of, how it was manufactured, and often narrow down the specific product it came from. That was my skill. That was my confidence. And on July 23, 1970, that confidence shattered. The call came through dispatch at approximately 4:15 in the afternoon. A child had gone missing from a church group outing at a picnic area near the Illinois River, about 40 miles southwest of Grants Pass. The child was Molly Ann Graves, age 6, daughter of Richard and Janet Graves of Grants Pass. The family attended First Baptist Church, and the outing was an annual summer event that the congregation had been holding for over 20 years. Roughly 60 people, families with children, had gathered at a day-use area along the river for a potluck lunch. The area was surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides, with the river forming the fourth boundary. Logging roads provided the only vehicle access, and the nearest paved highway was 7 miles east. Molly had been playing with a group of children near the river's edge under the supervision of 2 adults. At approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, one of the supervising adults, a woman named Donna Lewis, realized she could not see Molly. A quick count confirmed that Molly was no longer with the group. The initial assumption was that she had wandered back to the picnic tables where her parents were, but a search of the immediate area found no trace of her. Within 30 minutes, the adults at the picnic had organized a search. Within an hour, someone had driven to the ranger station and called the Josephine County Sheriff's Department. I was not involved at this point. Missing child cases in rural Oregon in 1970 were handled by local law enforcement with assistance from search and rescue volunteers. The crime lab only became involved when physical evidence needed analysis. I learned about Molly's disappearance the way most people in the region did, through the evening news broadcast and the next morning's newspaper. The story was straightforward and heartbreaking in the way that all missing child stories are. A little girl with brown hair and brown eyes, wearing a white dress with small blue flowers on it and white canvas shoes, had walked away from a church picnic and vanished into the Siskiyou wilderness. The search effort that followed was massive by the standards of that era and that region. Over the first 48 hours, more than 150 volunteers joined the professional search teams. Tracking dogs were brought in from Josephine County. A Civil Air Patrol aircraft flew grid patterns over the surrounding terrain. The Forest Service provided personnel familiar with the backcountry. Richard Graves, Molly's father, who worked as a mechanic at a truck repair shop in Grants Pass, did not leave the search area for the first 5 days. Janet Graves stayed at the picnic area command post, answering questions from investigators and providing photographs and physical descriptions of her daughter. The terrain made the search extraordinarily difficult. The Siskiyou Mountains in that region are steep, heavily forested with Douglas fir and tannock, and cut by deep canyons that channel water toward the Illinois River and its tributaries. Undergrowth in the riparian zones is nearly impenetrable in summer, with thickets of poison oak, blackberry, and salal that can stop a grown adult in their tracks. Elevation changes of 2,000 feet or more occur over distances of less than a mile. Rock outcroppings, talus slopes, abandoned mine shafts from the gold rush era, caves both mapped and unmapped. A 6-year-old child in that landscape would be nearly invisible from the air and could be within 50 feet of a searcher on the ground, without either party being aware of the other. By the 5th day, the professional assessment was grim. The sheriff's department liaison told the press that they remained hopeful, but that survival prospects diminished significantly with each passing day. A child Molly's age without water, food, or shelter in mountainous terrain during summer heat faced dehydration within 3 days. Hypothermia was possible at elevation during the cool nights. Animal predators, including black bears and mountain lions, were present throughout the search area. The unspoken consensus among the search teams was that they were transitioning from a rescue operation to a recovery operation. I followed the story in the newspaper each morning before driving to the lab in Salem. I did not know the Graves family. I had no personal connection to the case, but something about it lodged in my mind in a way that other missing person cases had not. Perhaps it was the detail about the white dress with blue flowers. Perhaps it was the photograph of Molly that the newspaper ran, showing a gap-toothed girl squinting into the sun with her hand raised to shade her eyes. Perhaps it was just the randomness of it, the idea that a child could be surrounded by 60 people on a sunny afternoon and simply cease to exist. On August 6, 1970, 14 days after Molly's disappearance, a Forest Service trail crew working on a maintenance project in a remote drainage approximately 11 miles south-southwest of the picnic area found her. The crew leader was a man named Dave Scott, a seasonal employee in his late 20s who had worked for the Forest Service for 3 summers. His crew of 4 was clearing fallen timber from a trail that connected 2 backcountry trailheads, routine work that took them through terrain that had not been part of the primary search grid because of its distance from the point of disappearance. 11 miles through that kind of country represents a distance that no search coordinator would consider plausible for a 6-year-old child traveling on foot. The professional estimate for maximum voluntary travel distance for a child Molly's age in that terrain was 1 to 2 miles. The outer boundary of the formal search area was 5 miles from the picnic site. Dave told me years later, when I tracked him down and interviewed him for my own files, that they almost missed her entirely. The rock overhang where she was found was set back from the trail by about 40 yards, partially screened by a stand of young Douglas fir that had grown up in the gap left by a large tree that had fallen years earlier. One of the crew members, a young man named Scott Lewis, no relation to the Donna Lewis who had been supervising the children, had stepped off the trail to relieve himself and noticed what he initially thought was a pile of animal hide draped over the rocks. He called to Dave, who came over and realized he was looking at a child. Molly was lying on her side in a shallow depression beneath the rock overhang. The space was not quite a cave, more of a natural shelter where the rock jutted out from the hillside at an angle, creating a dry area perhaps 6 feet deep and 4 feet high at its tallest point. The ground beneath the overhang had been covered with a layer of dried ferns and moss that appeared to have been deliberately placed rather than naturally accumulated. The arrangement was too uniform, too thick, too clearly defined at the edges to be accidental, and Molly was wrapped in something. Dave described it to me as looking like a rough blanket or shawl made of hair, not fur, not fabric, hair. Long, coarse strands of reddish-brown and dark brown hair, somehow woven or pressed together into a mat that was approximately 4 feet by 3 feet. It covered Molly from her shoulders to her feet, tucked around her body in a way that suggested someone had placed it over her deliberately, the way you would tuck a blanket around a sleeping child. Molly was alive, but barely responsive. Her eyes were open but unfocused. She did not react when Dave spoke to her, or when he touched her shoulder. Her skin was cool and pale, but not the gray color associated with severe dehydration. Her lips were dry and cracked. She was wearing the same white dress with blue flowers that she had been wearing the day she disappeared, though it was torn and stained. Her white canvas shoes were gone. Her feet were dirty and Dave emphasized this detail repeatedly when he told me the story, not injured, not cut, not blistered, not swollen. After 14 days in mountainous wilderness without shoes, her feet showed no damage consistent with walking on rock and forest floor. Dave sent one crew member running back to the trailhead to radio for help, while he and the remaining crew stayed with Molly. He gave her small sips of water from his canteen. She swallowed reflexively, but did not seem to register who he was or what was happening. He said she made a sound at one point, a soft vocalization that was not a word, not a cry, not a moan. He described it as a humming sound, almost musical, and it unsettled him in a way he could not articulate. The rescue helicopter reached them approximately 3 hours later. A paramedic assessed Molly at the scene and noted that her vital signs, while depressed, were significantly better than expected for a child who had been missing for 2 weeks without confirmed access to food or water. She was transported to Rogue Valley Medical Center in Medford, where she was admitted to the pediatric unit in serious but stable condition. Now, here is where my involvement begins and where this story shifts from a remarkable survival case into something else entirely. The Josephine County Sheriff's Department collected physical evidence from the rock overhang and from Molly herself. Standard procedure. They photographed the scene, bagged the fern and moss bedding, collected soil samples, and most importantly, they collected the hair covering that had been wrapped around her. The evidence was logged and transported to the crime lab in Salem, where it landed on my desk on August 8, 1970. Paul Wright assigned the case to me, routine fiber and hair analysis on evidence from a missing child recovery, determine if the covering material could be identified and sourced. Paul expected me to spend a day or two on it at most. He expected me to identify the material as horsehair or bear fur or some kind of handmade textile, write a short report, and move on to the next case in the queue. I spent the first hour just looking at the thing. It had been sealed in a large paper evidence bag, and when I removed it and spread it on the examination table, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Not unpleasant exactly, but strong. Musky, organic, with an undertone of something I could only describe as green, like crushed vegetation mixed with animal scent. The second thing I noticed was the construction. I had examined hundreds of textiles in my career to that point. Everything from industrial fabrics to hand-woven Native American blankets to improvised coverings made by homeless individuals from salvaged materials. This was different from all of them. The hairs were not woven in any traditional sense. There was no warp and weft, no loom pattern, no evidence of spinning or twisting. Instead, the hairs appeared to have been layered and compressed, almost felted, but not through any felting process I recognized. The resulting mat was surprisingly dense and uniform. When I held it up to the light, I could see no gaps. It was, from a textile engineering standpoint, remarkably effective insulation. I pulled individual hairs from the mat and mounted them on slides. Under the polarizing microscope, the first thing that struck me was the diameter. Human head hair averages between 50 and 100 microns in diameter. These hairs ranged from 110 to 170 microns, significantly thicker than human hair. My first thought was horse. Horsetail hair runs between 75 and 250 microns and is commonly used in textile applications. But when I examined the medullary structure, the internal core pattern visible in cross-section, it was wrong for horse. Horsehair has a wide, continuous medulla that's easily recognizable. These hairs had a fragmented medulla, similar to human hair but with an irregular pattern I could not match to any reference sample in our database. The cuticle scale pattern was equally anomalous. Hair identification relies heavily on cuticle morphology, the overlapping scales that cover the exterior of the hair shaft like shingles on a roof. Human hair has an imbricate pattern with smooth, flattened scales. Animal hairs show characteristic scale patterns specific to their species. What I was looking at had elements of both. The overall pattern was imbricate like human hair, but the individual scales were thicker and more pronounced than human, with a slight coronal tendency at the root end that I associated with primates. I checked the reference collection. I compared my samples against known primate hairs: human, chimpanzee, gorilla, orangutan. The closest match was gorilla, but even that comparison was approximate at best. The medullary index, the ratio of medulla diameter to total hair diameter, fell between human and gorilla values. The color was variable, ranging from dark auburn to nearly black, with a slight reddish cast when viewed in transmitted light. I spent 3 full days on those samples. I used every technique available to me: polarized light microscopy, cross-sectioning, burn testing, solubility testing in various chemical reagents. Each test produced results that narrowed the possibilities but never arrived at a definitive identification. The protein structure was consistent with mammalian keratin. The growth pattern was consistent with body hair rather than head hair. The pigmentation pattern was natural and showed no evidence of weathering or degradation that would suggest the hair had been shed and collected from the environment. The root ends on several samples were intact and showed signs of being pulled rather than cut or naturally shed, with follicular tissue still attached. I wrote my preliminary report on August 11th. In the findings section, where I was expected to identify the material, I wrote the following: fibers are consistent with mammalian hair of primate origin but do not match any known species in the laboratory reference collection. Recommended comparison with expanded primate hair databases at the Smithsonian Institution or comparable facility. Paul Wright read my report and looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. He was a careful man, not prone to assumptions, but he had practical concerns that outweighed scientific curiosity. The sheriff's department wanted a definitive answer for their case file, and they wanted it in language that made sense to investigators and attorneys, not cryptic equivocations about expanded databases. Paul asked me if the hair could be from a bear. I said no. He asked if it could be human. I said the morphology was inconsistent with human hair, but showed human-like characteristics. He asked me what that meant. I told him I did not know. Paul sent a subset of the samples to the FBI laboratory in Washington for a second opinion. Their report came back 3 weeks later. The FBI forensic examiner concluded that the hairs were of unknown mammalian origin, most likely from a primate species not represented in existing reference collections. The examiner added a handwritten note at the bottom of the report that read, "In my experience, these most closely resemble hairs attributed to unidentified primates in Pacific Northwest case files. Recommend consultation with Dr. Grover Krantz at Washington State University." Grover Krantz. If you know anything about the history of Bigfoot research, you know that name. He was a physical anthropologist at Washington State who had spent years studying reported Sasquatch evidence, including hair samples. In 1970, that interest had already made him a controversial figure in academic circles. Paul looked at the FBI examiner's recommendation and made a decision that shaped the next several decades of my career and the trajectory of this entire case. He said, "We are not sending state crime lab evidence to a Bigfoot researcher." He closed the file. Officially, the Molly Graves case was resolved. Child found alive after 14 days in the wilderness. Remarkable survival story. The covering material was classified as unknown mammalian hair, and the file was archived. The sheriff's department closed their investigation with a finding that Molly had wandered from the picnic area and survived through a combination of favorable weather, access to creek water, and what they described as the natural resilience of children. The hair covering was left unexplained in the final report. A curiosity, an anomaly, a loose thread that nobody wanted to pull. Nobody except me. I want to be clear about something. I did not become a true believer overnight. I did not look at those hair samples and decide that Bigfoot was real and that a Sasquatch had wrapped a blanket around a lost child. What happened was more subtle and more persistent than that. I became a man with a question he could not answer, and that question sat in the back of my mind like a stone in a shoe. Annoying, impossible to ignore, too small to justify stopping what you were doing to address it, but always there, always pressing, always reminding you that something was not right. I kept working. Cases came and went. The crime lab grew slowly over the years, adding staff and equipment as the state budget allowed. I became the lab's primary fiber analyst, then the supervisor of the trace evidence section. I testified in murder trials and kidnapping cases and arson investigations. I built a reputation as thorough, reliable, and conservative in my conclusions. I never speculated beyond what the evidence supported. I never drew conclusions that the data could not sustain. I was, in every professional sense, exactly the kind of careful, methodical scientist that the criminal justice system needs. But I kept a personal file, a manila folder that grew thicker over the years, stored in a locked drawer of my desk at home, containing every anomalous hair sample that crossed my professional path. They came in more often than you might expect. A missing hiker's tent with strange hairs on the fabric, a hunter's jacket found shredded in the woods with fibers that did not match any local wildlife, a homeowner's damaged garbage enclosure with hairs caught in the splintered wood. Most of these samples arrived at the lab as secondary evidence in cases that were primarily about something else, and most of them were eventually identified as belonging to known animals. But a few, maybe 1 out of every 10, showed the same characteristics I had documented in the Molly Graves case. Primate-like, not human, not any known great ape, something else. I tracked Molly through the years, though I had no professional reason to do so. The sheriff's case file was closed and the physical evidence was in storage. But the case had its hooks in me and I found ways to stay informed. Grants Pass was only a few hours from Salem, and I had contacts in the Josephine County law enforcement community who would occasionally share information if I asked the right questions over a cup of coffee. Molly's recovery was slow and complicated. She spent 2 weeks in the hospital before being released to her parents. The pediatric team at Rogue Valley Medical Center found her physical condition perplexing. For a child who had been lost in the wilderness for 2 weeks, she was in remarkably good shape. Dehydration was moderate rather than severe. She had lost weight but was not in the state of starvation they expected. Her feet, which should have been badly damaged from walking barefoot through mountain terrain, showed only minor surface dirt. Most strikingly, her core body temperature at admission was normal, not hypothermic, not hyperthermic, 98.4 degrees. After 14 days exposed to temperature swings of 40 degrees between day and night, her body temperature was exactly what you would measure in a child who had been sleeping in a warm bed. The psychological assessment was more concerning. Molly had no memory of the 2 weeks she had been missing. None. Not fragments, not dreams, not vague impressions. A complete and total absence of memory from the moment she walked away, from the group of children at the picnic to the moment Dave Scott's face appeared above her at the rock overhang. The psychiatrist who evaluated her, a doctor based in Medford whose name I am omitting at the request of his family, described it as the most complete dissociative amnesia he had encountered in a child. He noted in his report that Molly did not appear distressed by the memory gap. She did not seem frightened or traumatized in the way that children who have experienced abduction or abuse typically present. She was quiet, withdrawn, and occasionally confused by her surroundings, but she did not exhibit the hypervigilance or attachment disruption that would be expected after a prolonged traumatic experience. She also exhibited behaviors that her parents described as new. She had always been an outgoing, social child. After the incident, she became intensely solitary. She preferred to be outside, in the yard, in the woods behind their house, anywhere with trees and open sky. She resisted being indoors and had difficulty sleeping in her bed, often found in the morning curled on the floor near the window. She stopped eating cooked food for several weeks, rejecting everything her mother prepared but accepting raw fruits and vegetables. She developed an aversion to loud noises and artificial light that bordered on physical pain, and she began making sounds in her sleep that Richard and Janet described to the investigating detective as unlike anything they had heard from their daughter before. Low, rhythmic vocalizations that rose and fell in patterns that seemed deliberate, almost structured, as if she were speaking a language they could not recognize. These behavioral changes gradually diminished over the following months. By Christmas of 1970, Molly was eating normally, sleeping in her bed, and returning to something approaching her pre-disappearance personality. But she remained quieter than before, and the memory gap persisted. Her parents, following the psychiatrist's advice, did not press her about what had happened. They treated the 2 weeks as something to be moved past, not explored. Richard told a friend of mine years later that he and Janet had made a conscious decision to let it go. Their daughter was alive. That was the miracle. The rest, they decided, was God's business. I respected that decision even as it frustrated me. I had no right to intrude on a family's healing process for the sake of my own curiosity, but the evidence I had analyzed sat in that locked drawer at home, and it whispered to me every time I opened it to add another anomalous sample. The 1970s became the 1980s. I moved from general trace evidence work into a specialized focus on fiber analysis for violent crime cases. The field was advancing rapidly, with scanning electron microscopy and energy dispersive X-ray analysis, giving us tools that would have seemed like science fiction when I started my career. Each time a new analytical technique became available, I would pull out my personal collection and run the anomalous samples through whatever new capability we had. Every test confirmed and deepened the mystery. The hairs were not from any known species. Their protein composition was primate, their structure was consistent with a large-bodied hominid, and they contained genetic material that, as DNA analysis technology developed through the 1980s and 90s, proved to be extraordinarily confounding. I sent a sample to a private genetics laboratory in 1993, paying out of my own pocket and submitting it with minimal identifying information. The lab was able to extract mitochondrial DNA and run a comparison against their database. The results came back with a note from the lab director that said, essentially, that the sample appeared to be from a primate closely related to but distinct from Homo sapiens. The mitochondrial sequence shared significant homology with human DNA, but contained insertion and deletion mutations that did not match any known human population or any other cataloged primate species. The lab director asked where I had obtained the sample. I told him it was from a cold case. He asked if he could publish the results in a genetics journal. I said no. I said no because I understood, even then, that publication would bring attention. Attention would bring scrutiny. Scrutiny would lead back to the original case, to a little girl in Southern Oregon who had been wrapped in something impossible, and attention was the last thing that girl needed. By 1993, Molly Graves was 29 years old. She had graduated from Grants Pass High School in 1982, attended community college for 2 years, and was working as a veterinary technician at an animal clinic in the Rogue Valley. I knew this because I checked on her periodically, not through any official channel, but through the informal network of contacts I had built over 2 decades in law enforcement forensics. She was by all accounts a quiet, competent, unremarkable young woman. She had never married. She lived alone in a small house outside of Merlin, a rural community along the Rogue River. She spent her free time hiking in the mountains around her home. She volunteered at a local animal shelter. She attended the same Baptist church where her parents had been members for decades. She did not remember the 2 weeks. The memory gap remained complete and apparently permanent. Her parents, both still living in the 1990s, had never discussed it publicly. The community had largely forgotten the story. A child had gone missing and been found alive, and in the collective memory of Grants Pass, the miracle of her survival had overwritten the mystery of what had happened during those 14 days. I should have let it go. A smarter man, a less stubborn man, would have accepted the limits of what the evidence could tell him and moved on to problems that had solutions. But the samples in my drawer kept growing and the pattern kept strengthening, and every new piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. By the late 1990s, I had anomalous hair samples from 11 different locations across Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. Each sample showed the same morphological characteristics I had first documented in the Graves case: primate origin, unknown species, consistent diameter range, consistent medullary structure, consistent cuticle pattern. 11 independent samples from locations spanning over 700 miles and covering a time period of nearly 30 years, and they were all the same. I retired from the Oregon State Police in 2009 after 42 years of service. They gave me a plaque and a dinner and handshakes from people who respected my work and had no idea that the most important work I had ever done was in a locked drawer at home. I moved to a small property outside of Jacksonville, Oregon, 10 miles from Medford, and I set up a laboratory in my garage. A real laboratory with a research-grade microscope, a chemical fume hood, proper evidence storage, and a computer system capable of running the analytical software I had used for decades. My wife, Sharon, who had tolerated my obsession with patients and occasional exasperation for 38 years, helped me organize the space. She said if I was going to spend my retirement staring at hair, I might as well do it properly. I spent the first 2 years of retirement writing a comprehensive report, not for publication, not for any institution, for the file. I compiled every anomalous sample, every analysis, every comparison, every failed identification attempt, every technological advancement that had allowed me to extract new data from old evidence. I cross-referenced locations and dates and created maps showing the geographic distribution of the samples. I wrote detailed morphological descriptions using standardized terminology. I included the 93 genetics results and annotated them with updated interpretation based on the advances in comparative genomics that had occurred since then. The report was 412 pages long. I printed one copy and stored it in a fireproof safe in my garage laboratory. And then, because the universe has a sense of timing that I have never been able to explain, Molly Graves called me. It was a Tuesday in March of 2011. I was in the garage, recalibrating the microscope after a power fluctuation the previous night, when Sharon came out holding the cordless phone with her hand over the mouthpiece, and an expression on her face that I can only describe as carefully neutral. She said there was a woman on the phone who said her name was Molly, and that she wanted to talk to the man who had analyzed the blanket. I took the phone and sat down on the stool next to my workbench. My hands were not shaking, but something inside my chest was doing things that I would rather not describe. I said hello. The voice on the other end was quiet and measured, the voice of someone who had rehearsed what she was going to say. "Mr. Allen," she said, "my name is Molly Graves. I believe you examined evidence from my case in 1970. I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you because I have started remembering." I did not say anything for several seconds. 41 years. 41 years since I had put those hairs under a microscope and entered a labyrinth that had no exit. 41 years since a 6-year-old girl had been found wrapped in the impossible. And now that girl, 47 years old, was on my telephone telling me that the wall in her memory had begun to crack. I asked her how she had found me. She said she had requested the original case file from the Josephine County Sheriff's Office through a public records inquiry. My name was on the forensic analysis report. She had searched for me, discovered I was retired, and found my home address through a property records database. She said she had driven past my house 3 times over the previous month before working up the courage to call. I asked her what she was remembering. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I am remembering them, not people, them." We arranged to meet the following Saturday at a coffee shop in Grants Pass. I arrived early and sat in a booth near the back and waited. When Molly walked in, I recognized something in her immediately that I could not have predicted. She moved differently than other people in the room. Not abnormally, not obviously, but there was a quality to her movement that reminded me of wildlife I had observed in the forest. An alertness, a constant low-level attention to her surroundings that operated beneath conscious thought. She scanned the room before entering it. She chose the seat that put her back to the wall and gave her a sightline to the door. She positioned herself at an angle to the window rather than directly in front of it. These were not the habits of a woman who had read a book about personal safety. These were instincts. Molly was small, 5'2" at most, with brown hair going gray at the temples and a face that was weathered in a way that suggested she spent most of her time outdoors. Her hands were rough and capable. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, dressed in plain work clothes. She looked exactly like what she was, a rural Oregon woman who worked with animals for a living. She did not look like a person carrying a secret that could reshape our understanding of what shares this planet with us. But she was. She sat down across from me and studied my face for a full 30 seconds without speaking. Then she said, "You kept the samples." It was not a question. "Yes," I said. "You never published anything, never told anyone." I told the FBI lab. I told my supervisor. They chose not to pursue it. But you pursued it. I have been pursuing it for 41 years. Something in her expression shifted. Relief, I think. The relief of a person who has been carrying something alone and has finally found someone else willing to hold part of the weight. She took a breath and began to talk. The memories had started returning 18 months earlier in the fall of 2009. She was 45 at the time, and the memories began not as images or scenes, but as sensations, smells. She would be standing in her kitchen or walking through the clinic parking lot, and suddenly a scent would overwhelm her that had no source in her physical environment. Damp earth, crushed fern, something animal and warm and complex that she could not identify, but that produced in her a response she could only describe as recognition, not fear, not discomfort. Recognition. The way you smell your grandmother's house and are instantly 4 years old again. These scents carried the same weight of belonging. Then the sounds began. She would wake in the night to a sound that existed only in her memory. A deep, resonant vocalization that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, that vibrated in her ribcage before she was fully conscious. She would lie in bed in the dark and the sound would continue for minutes at a time. A sound that was not human and not animal, but something between. And she would feel her breathing slow and her body relax in response to it, as if the sound were a lullaby she had known before she had words. By the spring of 2010, the sensory memories had progressed to fragments of visual recall. Brief, disconnected images that appeared without warning and vanished before she could fully process them. An expanse of reddish-brown hair, close enough to touch, filling her entire visual field. Hands, enormous hands with fingers that were longer and thicker than human, but articulated with the same range of motion, wrapping something around her body. Green light filtering through a canopy so dense that the sky above was invisible. A face that was not human but was looking at her with an expression she understood without question to be concern, worry, tenderness. Molly told me all of this in a voice that was calm and clinical, as if she were describing a medical history rather than the most extraordinary experience of her life. She had spent 41 years not knowing what had happened to her, and now that the memories were returning, she had decided to treat them with the same objectivity she applied to her work at the veterinary clinic. Observe, document, do not assume. Let the evidence speak. I asked her if she had told anyone else. She said she had told her father, Richard, who was 78 and in declining health. His response had been to cry, not from fear or disbelief, but from relief. He told Molly that he had always known something had cared for her during those 2 weeks. He said the condition she was found in, the way she was wrapped, the bedding in the rock overhang, the fact that she was alive and essentially unharmed after 14 days, none of that was consistent with a child who had been alone. Someone or something had sheltered her, fed her, kept her warm, and returned her to a place where she would be found. Richard said he had spent 40 years thanking God for his daughter's survival and wondering whether the instrument of that survival was something that deserved his gratitude as well. I asked Molly if the memories had continued to develop. She said yes. By the time she called me, she had recovered what she estimated to be several hours of continuous memory from the 2-week period, though the sequence was fragmented and she was not confident about the chronological order. What she described over the next 3 hours in that coffee shop in Grants Pass was this. She had walked away from the other children at the picnic because she heard something. Not a shout or a scream or a mechanical noise, but a vocalization that was musical in quality, a low humming that seemed to come from the tree line at the edge of the picnic area. She was 6 years old. She was curious. She walked toward the sound the way any 6-year-old would walk toward an interesting noise, without fear, without hesitation, following the path of least resistance through the brush and into the forest. The humming continued, always just ahead of her, always just beyond the next stand of trees, leading her deeper into the woods with the patience of something that understood exactly how to hold a child's attention. She did not remember how long she walked. She did not remember being afraid. She remembered the forest getting darker as the canopy thickened, and the underbrush getting taller until she could barely see over it, and the humming getting closer until she could feel it in her teeth. And then she saw them. She remembered two, a large one and a smaller one, though even the smaller one was enormous by any human standard. They were standing in a clearing where a massive tree had fallen, letting light pour through the gap in the canopy. They were covered in hair, reddish-brown, the same color as the mat I had analyzed in my laboratory. They were upright, bipedal, watching her. The large one, the one Molly believed was female based on body proportions and subsequent behavior, made the humming sound again. It came from deep in her chest, a vibration more than a vocalization, and Molly felt her entire body respond to it. Her fear, which had begun to rise as she processed what she was seeing, dissolved. Not suppressed, dissolved. She said it was as if the sound communicated safety at a frequency below conscious thought, bypassing her rational mind and speaking directly to whatever part of the brain makes a child feel secure. Molly walked toward them. She did not remember making a decision to do so. Her body simply moved forward, drawn by the sound and by something else she could not name, an attraction that had no analog in her 6-year-old vocabulary. She walked across the clearing and stopped about 10 feet from the female. The creature lowered herself slowly, bringing her face closer to Molly's level. Molly remembered the eyes, brown, deep, intelligent in a way that she understood even at 6, even without the language to express it. Eyes that were evaluating her not as a threat or as prey, but as something to be understood. The female reached out one hand. Molly remembered the size of it, the dark skin of the palm, the fingers that could have wrapped entirely around her torso. The hand moved slowly, deliberately, and touched Molly's hair, gently, the way you might touch something fragile that you are examining for the first time. The female made a different sound, shorter, higher in pitch, directed at the smaller one. Communication, a comment, an observation about her. Molly did not remember everything that followed with the same clarity. The memories became fragmentary again, scenes separated by gaps she could not fill. But the scenes she did recall painted a picture that was consistent and coherent, and profoundly different from any missing child scenario I had encountered in 4 decades of forensic work. She remembered being carried, held against the female's chest, one arm supporting her weight with an ease that suggested Molly was no heavier than a handful of leaves. The hair against her face was coarse but warm, and the body beneath it radiated heat like a furnace. She remembered the motion, a smooth, rocking gait that was nothing like being carried by a human. Longer strides, a lower center of gravity, a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. She remembered the shelter. Not the rock overhang where she was eventually found, but a different place, deeper in the mountains, a space formed by 2 massive boulders leaning against each other, with branches and debris piled over the gap to create an enclosed area. The floor was thick with dried vegetation, ferns and moss and strips of bark, and it smelled like the forest concentrated, like everything green and alive had been compressed into a single room. There were others there. She could not say how many, but more than 2. She remembered shapes in the darkness, the sound of breathing, the occasional vocalization that seemed to carry meaning she could almost but not quite decipher. She remembered being fed. The female brought her things to eat, roots that tasted like turnips, berries she recognized as huckleberries, the same ones she had picked with her mother in the mountains near their house, something that might have been grubs or larvae, pale and soft, which she ate without hesitation in a way that horrified her adult self when the memory returned. She was never hungry. Whatever maternal instinct the female possessed extended to this small, strange, hairless creature that had followed a humming sound into the trees. She was cared for, fed, kept warm, protected. She remembered nighttime. The darkness inside the shelter was absolute, and the sounds that filled it were unlike anything she had heard in her short life. Deep breathing from multiple sources, creating a layered rhythm that rose and fell like waves. Occasional vocalizations, soft exchanges between individuals, conversations conducted in a register that her ears could barely process, and beneath it all, the humming, the same sound that had drawn her from the picnic, produced now by the female as she held Molly against her body in the dark. A sound that was comfort and safety and belonging, compressed into a vibration. She remembered the smaller one, the one she had first seen in the clearing. She believed it was young, a juvenile, roughly equivalent in development to a human child of 8 or 9, though already larger than most adult humans. This one was curious about her in a way that the adults were not. It would approach her and study her with the same intensity she studied it. It brought her small objects, stones and sticks, and once a feather from a bird she could not identify, presenting them with a gesture that she interpreted as offering. Gifts, the way a child gives a friend something interesting they have found. She remembered reaching out and accepting a smooth, round stone from its hand, and the sound it made in response, a short, rising vocalization that she believed was pleasure. I sat in that coffee shop and listened to Molly describe all of this, and I want to tell you what I felt. I felt the last 41 years of my life validated in a single afternoon. Every anomalous sample, every late night in the garage laboratory, every argument with Paul Wright about closing the file, every dollar I had spent out of my own pocket on genetic analysis, every time Sharon had looked at me with that expression that mixed love with the specific concern you reserve for someone you think might be chasing something that does not exist. It existed. Molly was telling me it existed, and the evidence I had collected for 4 decades confirmed every word she said. I asked her how the 2 weeks ended. This was the part she struggled with most, the part where the memories were most fragmented and most emotionally charged. She remembered waking one morning in the shelter to a different energy. The adults were agitated, moving quickly, making sounds she had not heard before, low and urgent, that communicated danger even across the species barrier. She remembered the female picking her up and carrying her. Fast now, the smooth gait replaced by something closer to a run, crashing through brush and across streams and up and down slopes that would have been impassable for a human carrying a child. They traveled for what felt like hours. Molly could not say how far or in what direction. She remembered being afraid for the first time since the clearing, not of the creatures, but of whatever had made them afraid. Something was wrong. Something had changed. The female held her tighter, closer, and the humming that had been a lullaby became something else, a warning, a promise, a sound that said, "I will not let anything happen to you." And then the female stopped. They were at the rock overhang, the one where Dave Scott's crew would find her days later. The female set Molly down on the bed of ferns that had already been prepared, already arranged, as if this place had been planned as a destination. The female wrapped her in the hair covering, the mat that would later end up on my examination table. She tucked it around Molly's body with a care that Molly, at 47, remembering it at last, could only compare to the way her own mother had tucked her into bed every night of her childhood. The female touched Molly's face, one finger tracing the line of her cheek. And then she made a sound that Molly had never heard from her before, a sound that was not a hum and not a vocalization and not a word, a sound that Molly, drawing on every scrap of context and memory and instinct available to her, interpreted as goodbye. When Molly woke, she was alone. The humming was gone. The forest was quiet in a way it had not been for 2 weeks, populated only by birdsong and wind and the distant sound of water. She was wrapped in the covering, lying on the ferns, staring at the underside of the rock overhang, and she could not remember how she had gotten there. The wall had already descended. The 14 days were already gone, sealed behind a barrier that would not begin to crack for another 4 decades. Molly finished her account, and we sat in silence for a long time. The coffee shop had emptied around us. Our cups were cold. The afternoon light through the window had shifted from white to gold. I was trying to organize what I had heard into a framework that my forensic training could process, and I was failing, and I did not mind failing because some things are larger than frameworks. I told Molly about the evidence, all of it. The hair analysis, the FBI report, the DNA results, the 40 years of anomalous samples from across the Pacific Northwest. I told her about the 400-page report in my fireproof safe. I told her that the physical evidence corroborated everything she had described, that the covering she had been wrapped in was made of hair from a large, unknown primate, that the genetic material extracted from that hair showed a species closely related to but distinct from Homo sapiens, that similar samples had been collected across hundreds of miles of wilderness over decades, indicating a population, not an individual. Not a freak occurrence, a population. Molly listened to all of this, and then she asked me a question that I will carry for the rest of my life. She said, "Did they ever test my clothing, the dress I was wearing?" I told her I did not know. The dress had been collected as evidence, but my assignment had been limited to the hair covering. I had never examined the dress itself. Molly looked at me with an expression that was equal parts amusement and exasperation. "Robert," she said, "I was wrapped in that covering for days. I was held against that female's body for hours at a time. I was inside their shelter, surrounded by them, for 2 weeks. If the covering had their hair on it, my clothing was saturated with it. My dress, my skin, my own hair. Everything I was wearing would have been covered in their DNA." She was right. Of course she was right. It was so obvious that I felt a flush of professional embarrassment that I had not pursued it decades earlier. The dress, preserved in evidence storage for 41 years, would be a treasure trove of biological material. Not just hair, but skin cells, saliva, sweat, any biological fluid that might have been transferred during sustained close contact. Modern DNA analysis could extract genetic profiles from evidence that would have been impossible to process with 1970s technology. The dress was a time capsule of the most significant physical contact between a human and an unknown primate species ever documented. I contacted the Josephine County Sheriff's Office the following week. The evidence from the Graves case was still in storage, archived in the cold case section of their evidence facility. The detective I spoke with, a woman named Megan Taylor, who had joined the department long after the original case, was cooperative but puzzled. She asked why a retired forensic analyst was interested in a 41-year-old closed case involving a child who had been found alive. I told her a version of the truth, that new forensic technology might be able to extract information from the evidence that was not available in 1970, and that the case file contained unresolved questions about the source of the hair covering found with the victim. Megan checked with her supervisor and received authorization for me to examine the stored evidence on an informal basis. No official case reopening, no departmental resources, just access. The evidence room was in the basement of the county courthouse, a climate-controlled space lined with metal shelving units, holding thousands of sealed boxes and bags. The Graves case evidence was in a cardboard file box on a shelf in the cold case section, labeled with the case number and the year. I opened it with gloved hands and found exactly what I hoped to find. The hair covering now sealed in a large plastic evidence bag, soil samples from the overhang in sealed containers, photographs from the scene, and in a separate bag, Molly's white dress with small blue flowers. The dress was yellowed with age, but structurally intact. I could see stains on it that were consistent with soil, plant material, and biological fluids. I could see, even without magnification, individual hairs caught in the fabric, hairs that were darker and thicker than a 6-year-old girl's. I held the bag up to the fluorescent light and counted at least 30 visible hairs on the exterior surface of the dress alone. Megan let me photograph everything and take a limited number of samples for analysis. I pulled 12 hairs from the dress surface, selected from different areas of the garment, and sealed them in individual evidence envelopes. I also took fiber samples from areas where I could see what appeared to be biological staining, using sterile swabs that I pressed against the fabric through small openings I cut in the evidence bag with Megan's permission. I drove those samples home like they were made of glass. I cleared my workbench, sterilized every surface, and began the analysis the next morning. The hairs matched. Every single one of them showed the same morphological characteristics I had documented in 1970 from the covering. Same diameter range, same medullary structure, same cuticle pattern, same unknown primate origin. But the swab samples were where the real revelation lived. Using a commercial DNA extraction kit and sending the results to a genetics laboratory in California that I had worked with on previous projects, I obtained full genomic profiles from the biological material on Molly's dress. The results took 6 weeks to process. When they arrived, I sat at my workbench and read them 3 times. The laboratory had identified DNA from at least 4 distinct individuals, none of them matching any species in the public genetic databases. The mitochondrial analysis placed all 4 individuals within the same maternal lineage, suggesting a family group. The nuclear DNA showed 48 chromosomes, 2 more than the human standard of 46, with a genome that was approximately 94% homologous to Homo sapiens. The remaining 6% contained sequences that the laboratory could not classify, genes that coded for proteins with no known human analog. 4 individuals, a family, living in the Siskiyou Mountains of southern Oregon, sharing their shelter and their food and their warmth with a lost 6-year-old girl for 2 weeks, and then carrying her to a place where humans would find her, and wrapping her in a covering that they had made, and leaving her there to be returned to the world she belonged to. I showed the results to Molly on a warm afternoon in May of 2012, sitting on the porch of her house outside Merlin. The Illinois River was visible from where we sat, a silver thread cutting through the green valley. The mountains rose beyond it, the same mountains where she had been lost and found and sheltered by beings that science refused to acknowledge. She read the report slowly, carefully, the way she read veterinary lab results at work. When she finished, she set the papers on her lap and looked out at the mountains and said something that I have thought about every day since. She said, "They knew I was not theirs. They knew I belonged somewhere else. They took care of me anyway, and when it was time, they brought me back." She paused. Then she said, "I think the female was a mother. I think she saw a child alone in the forest, and she did what any mother would do. She kept me safe until she could return me." I did not publish the DNA results. Neither did Molly. We discussed it at length over the months that followed and arrived at the same conclusion through different reasoning. My concern was practical. Publication would invite scrutiny that would compromise the evidence chain, subject the samples to challenges that the informal nature of my analysis could not withstand, and most importantly, draw attention to a population of beings whose primary survival strategy for thousands of years had been avoiding detection. Revealing their existence, even through genetic data, could trigger the very response they had spent millennia evading. Curiosity at first, then research, then encroachment, then inevitably the slow destruction that human attention brings to everything it touches. Molly's reasoning was simpler and I think more profound. She said, "They gave me back. They could have kept me. They could have ignored me. They could have let me die. Instead, they took care of me for 2 weeks and carried me to a place where I would be found and wrapped me up so I would not be cold. That is not a thing that deserves to be exposed. That is a thing that deserves to be protected." I am 81 years old. Sharon passed 3 years ago, and I live alone now in our house outside Jacksonville. The fireproof safe in the garage still contains the 400-page report, updated now to include the 2011 analysis and Molly's recovered memories. The evidence samples are stored in a secondary container with proper chain of custody documentation that would satisfy any forensic review if such a review ever becomes necessary. Molly is 62. She still lives outside Merlin, still works with animals, still hikes in the Siskiyou Mountains on weekends. She tells me that sometimes on certain trails, in certain weather, at certain times of day, she smells something that stops her in her tracks. Damp earth, crushed fern, something warm and complex and alive, and she stands very still and closes her eyes and listens for a sound that is not quite a hum and not quite a song and not quite a word. She tells me that sometimes, very rarely, she hears it, far away, deep in the trees, a vibration more than a sound, felt in the ribs before it reaches the ears. She does not walk toward it anymore. She is not 6 years old. She understands what lives in those mountains, and she understands the distance that must exist between their world and ours for both to survive. But she stands there on the trail and she listens, and she says that when she hears it, the wall in her memory thins for just a moment, and she can feel the warmth of being held, the weight of being carried, the impossible, undeniable knowledge of being loved by something that was not her kind, but chose to treat her as if she were. I have examined over 14,000 pieces of physical evidence in my career. I have helped solve crimes and establish truths and provide certainties in situations where certainty seemed impossible. But the most important evidence I ever analyzed was a mat of woven hair found wrapped around a 6-year-old girl in the Siskiyou Mountains in 1970. That evidence told me that we share this landscape with something extraordinary, something intelligent and compassionate and deliberately hidden, something that found a lost child and made a choice that I can only describe as moral, a choice to protect, to nurture, to return. The DNA was on her clothing. It is still there, preserved in an evidence box in the basement of the Josephine County Courthouse, waiting for a world that is ready to hear what it has to say. I do not believe that world exists yet, but Molly and I have done our part. We have documented, we have preserved, we have protected the evidence and the secret it carries. And someday, when the time is right, when humans have developed the capacity to encounter the extraordinary without the compulsion to destroy it, the truth will be there. In the fibers, in the DNA, in the memory of a woman who was 6 years old when she wandered into the forest and discovered that the forest was already home to something wonderful. That is my testimony. 14,000 pieces of evidence, and only one of them kept me awake at night for 56 years. Only one of them mattered more than any case I ever worked, any trial I ever testified in, any crime I ever helped solve. A white dress with blue flowers worn by a girl who went missing in 1970, found 2 weeks later barely alive, wrapped in something that should not exist, carrying the DNA of something the world is not ready to know about. Not yet, but the evidence is patient. It will wait.